Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Dork Souls Podcast. I am your host, Lisa Wallen.
And I'm your other host, Hector Navarro. And today we are introducing ourselves, talking about all the stuff that we love and why our dork souls came together to make this podcast.
Yes, and be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, listen to us on our platforms, and follow our Instagram. And I hope you'd enjoy our first episode. All right, cool. Well, as you guys just heard, today is our first episode of the Dork Souls Podcast.
Woo!
Give us a round of applause. I am Lisa Wallen.
I'm Hector Navarro.
And Hector, why did we decide to change or to come up with this name, I should say?
The name Dork Souls?
Yeah.
Because we wanted a name that described who we are. And we're dorky down to our soul.
Aw,
Plus,
so precious.
It's a reference to a video game franchise that you are deeply in love with,
that
you're
I
enamored
will
with.
deeply talk about a lot on this podcast. So it's very fitting.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully people won't listen to the podcast thinking it's just a Dark Souls podcast.
I mean, it is that,
yeah,
right? But it's also other stuff.
Yeah, I'll do my best to try to talk about other things. But
hopefully the word dork will throw them off and they'll go, hey, this is there's one word that's different. Yeah, there's a reason for that. Yeah.
The dork of our souls. Well, also because there is already a lot of nerdy podcasts out there, dorky podcasts. But
I was doing some research. I looked it up last night. There's infinity nerdy podcasts. So that's how many there are right now.
Yeah, but they're not as cool as us.
No, we really have to stand out. None of them have us currently.
Yeah, none of them feature
both of us at the same time. So we have to differentiate.
You have had a bunch of podcasts that were dorky though.
Yeah. I probably have one right now at the time of whenever this is released. I probably have another one again.
You have 7 already lined up, ready to go.
Yeah.
I had one, which was my anime podcast, and that was Kawaii 5-0.
Such a good name.
Which is I know. I used to be so good at puns.
Yeah, what happened?
Yeah, shout out to one of the people on my stream who came up with the name for this podcast.
Dork Souls?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Obi-Wan Boner Kenobi 69 or whatever
one of those guys,
screen name was. Yeah.
Honestly,
OBGYN Kenobi 69.
OBGYN Kenobi 42069 came up with it. But yeah, that was very heavy on anime, and I think one of the issues with that is because it was mainly anime. It was me who watched a bunch of anime and co-hosts that didn't. Mm-hmm. Every episode, it'd be like, hey, watch a show.
Sure.
They wouldn't do it, and then it's just me rewatching the same thing. Which
it's tough. You got to have a balance, dude.
Yeah.
And we have discovered through our friendship, which
that we don't like each other's shit.
We don't like each other's at all. But no, we have a lot of shared interests, similar interests, but we also have different interests. And we've hung out. We've hung out in Tokyo, Japan, a fair amount.
Kyoto, Japan.
We've hung out in Los Angeles, and every time we hang out, I think we do end up talking about what we're into, what we like. And there are similarities. It's a Venn diagram, but then there's also stuff that you are an anime manga person. You are a specific type of gaming person. I have video game knowledge for sure, and I love so many different games, but it's like I'll hear you talk about stuff, or I'll watch your streams, and I'm like, I don't know the first thing about this franchise that's now been going 10 years, and it's a whole thing. And so it's always fun to it basically boils down to, it's fun to listen to people who are passionate about what they're talking about, even if you don't fully know all the details. Even if you're
so cringy when you're talking about it.
Yes, but again, the thing that you and I have is I think we have a balance. I think we can both do that.
We can both be cringy and not cringy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
Well, also, we're covering more than just one thing. You're big into comic books. I don't even know what DC stands for, which we found out 10 minutes ago.
It's true.
What does it stand for?
You want to know?
I really do.
I made a joke. I was like, what do you think it stands for? Da Comics? And then you laughed and you're like, what does DC stand for? I'm like, Lisa, really? DC stands for Detective Comics.
Does it really?
Yeah. Why do you think that's off? I'm so curious about that.
Well, who's the detective?
Batman.
Okay.
Well, one of, Batman debuted in a comic book series in 1939 that was just called Detective Comics, and people would get an issue of Detective
DC
Comics.
Comics. So it's Detective Comics.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
That's right. And I'm sure we'll find other silly examples of of naming conventions throughout both of our passions. Yeah. So when people say DC Comics, it technically does stand for Detective Comics, which is kind of why the company,
I'm
the
kind
brand,
of a comics comic.
Yeah,
so.
you are. Yeah, you are. That's kind of why it's the same with like KFC just sort of goes by KFC apparently. Like they really don't call themselves Kentucky Fried Chicken anymore.
Yeah, because they're not just in Kentucky.
Sure, if that's the reason.
I don't know.
Or Dunkin' is now just Dunkin' and not Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, but I feel like DC being an acronym already makes that a little different.
Yeah.
Like Dunkin' isn't an acronym for anything.
I know. But if you were to say, for example, to somebody, hey, you want to go to Dunkin'? They might go, why is it called Dunkin'? And it's like, oh, because you dunk your donuts in coffee. Like that, like you're Dunkin'. What do you dunk? Donuts. Okay, why? Will they sell donuts? Well, I didn't know that. That sort of disconnect of like, yeah, they're not called that anymore. But
it's like if you call Burger King BK King.
That's true. That's true. I'm going to the BK King.
Yeah,
what? I'm sorry, what?
The Burger King.
The BK King restaurant. The BK King fast food thing.
But basically, it's that even though you and I are very proud dorks and very proud nerds, there's still so much out there that we don't know.
Yes.
And one of us can teach each other.
Yeah.
And even guests that are on the show that are into weird shit can come and teach us stuff as well. And I think that's just why our souls are combined, Dork Souls. Anyways, today was a great episode.
That's it.
Just kidding.
That's the whole thing.
No, we originally started. Well, you and I were friends online for a while because through mutual people, and then we didn't really meet until almost over a year ago in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And I always knew you online as the comic book person. Like anytime I talk about you to people, I'm like,
cool, that's nice.
He's a comic book guy.
Yeah, I like that. That's great.
Not like the Simpsons comic book guy.
No,
like you're not
much worse. Much worse.
You're not insufferable to be around. But that's how I always knew you as. And then I came over to your house and saw your garage, which was insane. And I'm sure people have seen it or will see it. And it just made me realize how little knowledge I have about comic books and how I remember because I was going through and I was helping you like scan them. So that you can put them on your little...
You want to get real dorky? Yeah, that's a true thing. I said, Lisa, you're the tallest friend I have. And I have a big shelf. And I could eat... This is a one-person job, but it'll go by twice as fast if it's a two-person effort. I said, can you come over and reach the top shelf books and bring them down in stacks so that I can beep, 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 scan them and put them into a database?
Did we ever finish?
No. We still have to do the far left little corner on the side or whatever. But
it's easily like 1,000 books.
Maybe. Yeah. And like these are paperbacks or hardcover. These are like collections, not just individual comic book issues or whatever. But these are things I've also been collecting since I was in high school.
Yeah. And
I'm 37.
Sure some of them are worth money too.
No. Well, some of them might be. Actually, when we were just recently maybe about to evacuate because of the fires.
You're like,
that are
which one of these comic books?
I did go in there and I was like, which one of these? It's not that they're necessarily, some of them, of course, have sentimental value, but some of them are like, no, these are out of print. And they're really tough to try. And if I go to eBay, they might be worth a couple $100 or whatever. Usually like a big beefy hardcover thing that they don't make anymore, a special edition, whatever it is. In fact, just not too long ago, there was one of my favorite artists, a guy named George Perez, who was a groundbreaking comic book artist in New York City. The first like Latino American, I think he's originally from Puerto Rico, and he's passed away recently. Maybe a year or two ago, he's passed away. But in his career, he also like didn't even realize, but he created the first Latino Marvel superhero character, a character named the White Tiger, who's finally now going to show up in the new Daredevil show. The White Tiger is going to show up. He's this like Puerto Rican superhero that is in New York and then ends up meeting Daredevil and whatever. But this artist was a legendary comic book artist, one of my favorites, and he did a very special comic book 20 years ago called it was a DC and Marvel crossover. It was a
Detective Comics
and Marvel crossover, which is very rare. And so before he had passed away because he was terminally ill, DC and Marvel once again teamed up just to reprint his story, and they put it into this very special book that then also raised funds for fighting cancer and cancer research or whatever it was. And so he got to see it again in print, and then he passed away not that long after.
Oh no.
So that book is very it's like that's out of print. That's very rare. And I love it.
I mean, I guess it is kind of the same subject. When we were thinking about, so for people who are watching, because this is going to be out way later. Yeah. Obviously LA was on fire recently. Yeah. And a lot of us.
And maybe again at the time of this, you're watching it. It might be, look outside. I don't know.
There you
Check
go.
the news.
But at the time, we were both we live in similar areas, so we're both maybe
gonna
need to evacuate.
Yeah.
And honestly, like that whole, as stressful as that was, all I was thinking there is like, God, like why couldn't I just be like a boring person? Like, why do I own so much cool
that goes,
shit?
I have my keys, my wallet, I'm good to go.
Yeah,
like it's just a boring
I can
person
replace
that's
everything at Home Goods.
Oh, I have my
like,
tax papers, I'm ready.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I was like, I was putting all like my pins, because like you have like really rare comic books.
Sure.
I have really rare merch that you only got at certain collab cafes. You don't, which is like, that's, yeah. In my world, that's my nerdy thing is like, I flew to Japan and got things that you can't buy anymore. That I had to buy things that are thrifted. I bought things off of Macari, and it's like, to lose that stuff, people are like, yeah, but it's just stuff.
Just
like,
get it again. I'm like, yes.
People who say it's just stuff are not nerds.
That's true.
Yeah.
Because to be fair, though, when people do say that, it's like, you're correct for about 95% of our stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
But there's a 5% amount of things that it's like, no, that's not, again, you don't understand the efforts we had to go through to like find this, get this, purchase it, be first in line, you know, like, reserve it, whatever,
stuff,
pre-order.
But stuff is important to people.
Yeah,
I'm sorry you're boring.
And it has sentimental value.
I'm
like
sorry
I said,
you buy things at Target. Okay.
That's it.
Like,
That's it.
Yeah.
You can easily buy that all again. But yeah, anyway.
But
it was fine, and our places are, as of now, safe.
Right now they are. I think I still have things in my trunk just in case.
Yeah.
But I remember when I did come over and we were scanning all the books and whatnot, I was like asking you questions.
Yeah.
And I think, and I kind of talked to you about this before. It's always been it's always been kind of hard for me to be a woman in this type of space, because I feel like if I ask a question, then I'm no longer a reliable nerd. Because certain men will say that certain men in the space will go out of their way to try to find a reason to take away your passions. Be like, oh, well, you didn't beat this boss. You never played that game. Well, you're not a real gamer. And they only do this to girls.
Yep.
And so when I was in your garage and I was asking you questions, like you weren't being pretentious about it. You weren't being like mean about it.
Thanks. I was hopefully being nice about it.
No, you were like trying to explain, because I was like I like one of my reasons why I got more into manga. So, which it basically is the topic for today's episode.
Yes.
Is that like you grew up on more of the American side of nerdiness, and I grew up on the more Japanese side of nerdiness. The
topic today is East versus West.
Yeah.
What's better?
It's about politics.
What's
now.
too woke?
What's too woke? I was always in a manga, which made it so easy to serialize, because it's like, okay, you want to read like Naruto, you start with volume 1, and then you go through, and then you can read the side stuff, and you can go into Shippuden, and then I was like, how do I read Batman? And anytime I've asked people this question, they do that.
I know.
They do that.
No, and this is not a sigh of like, and also, by the way, when I teased you earlier on the way here about you not knowing DC, I'm like teasing you, yes, because you're my friend, but I also said like, but this is also not your fault. This is like the fault of the company and their marketing.
Oh, absolutely.
That it's not like generally known what the thing is. That people might still have, questions that are pretty core concepts about stuff that have never, I guess, permeated into popular culture, maybe, debatably. But then you pointed out, but I have a friend named Sam who didn't know what a video game boss is. And I was like, okay, fair. Sam didn't know what a boss is in a video game.
There you go,
that's not video game marketing's fault. That's just Sam. She had no interest at all.
Listen, I still haven't seen like the last like 3 Star Wars movies.
Sure.
So it's the same.
I have them in 3D. You want to watch them in 3D?
No, absolutely not.
What? Why not? Oh my God, they're so fun. Oh, they're so cool.
It's just one of those things where it's
You're
like
just uninterested.
Yeah, we could talk about that actually.
I'll say this. It's this is the thing I'm honestly excited about. I'm excited when I have people that I know or people that I care about, people that I know are not jerks and who are not asking that question in bad faith, for example. How do I even get into reading comics? When people are genuinely like curious about it and not judgmental, I go, you're my people. Let me set you up. I can try to help as best I can. And even with something like Star Wars, if you're like, I'm not interested in it, because it is so big, and it's true with most of the, I guess, like franchises and shit that I'm into. Yeah. I can easily go, but not everybody has seen all of it. And there's so many variations to it that I could.
They pump out too much stuff too
sure.
quickly.
Yeah,
that's my big thing.
Which is not exactly. That's another thing. It's like I don't think that with something like with a lot of big American media franchises, Star Wars, Star Trek, which at the time of this recording, like a new movie's about to come out in 2 days.
Here you go.
Okay. Which is a spinoff of a TV show and whatever. Marvel Comics, DC Comics, these brands. Sorry, DC. these brands are
Detective Comics.
they're so massive that like some people believe they're like, oh, you're supposed to do all of it.
My equivalent to that is like
No.
One Piece.
Right.
Whereas like One Piece has 1,000 episodes. Yeah, but it's just one thing.
Fine, that's true.
Yeah.
So you are kind of expected to do all of it.
Yeah.
But even then, One Piece is like, sure, but here's a live action series that's sort of starting over and people could jump onto that. Here's a new anime series that they're doing
starting,
that's like a remake that it's trying to be sort of an entry point. But my thing is with some of that stuff, number one, you're not supposed to do all of it.
Yeah.
If I'm a fan of Marvel Comics, I don't know a single person alive who has read every single Marvel comic book ever made or is reading every single one that they put out every week.
You wouldn't know them because they're in their basement reading the comic books still.
Instead of listening to this or interacting with people or whatever. Like, not even computers can absorb all that.
I remember when they first had this conversation because I loved Christian Bale and loved him as Batman.
Oh. And you went, I'm interested in Batman.
Yeah.
And somebody went, no, you can't.
It was like, well, what kind of Batman?
Sure.
And I was just like, oh, I really like Christian Bale Batman. Well, Christian Bale's Batman is based off of this certain Batman series, and so you can start on that. I said, okay. And I remember like going to a comic book store and like trying to find that and was just so overwhelmed with like, how do I just start? I want to read Christian Bale Batman. I remember saying that as like a 15-year-old, and they're like, you can't read Christian Bale Batman. It was
watch it.
Yeah, you can. It's like, okay.
You know, it's tough. I know, but I guess now what I'm realizing is it's almost like to expect a person who's maybe curious about Marvel, for example, to then just go and try to do all of Marvel, to me is the same as expecting a person who's like, oh, I'm interested in manga. I read a manga. Okay, now go to Barnes & Noble and read every manga.
Yeah.
Even if they're different series, read them all. It's like, that's
being a nerd.
silly.
Being a nerd is very overwhelming.
It is. You're supposed to, and with manga, you're supposed to read the one thing that you're into and then kind of go from there.
It's the same thing with video games.
Yeah.
Like, I just did a review for the new Pirate Yakuza game, which will be out by the time this podcast is out.
Nice.
And everyone's like, can I start on that game? I'm like, you can start on this
sure.
game.
Good.
But there's so much history involved with these characters because
that you'll get more out of it if you do
games is like
this. Yeah.
0, 1 through 6 is one big saga. Then 7 and 8 is its own. It's like, like, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, but you should start at this one. And then sometimes I just don't. I'm just like, sure, play whatever you want.
Absolutely.
If you like it,
anything
go back,
to get you into the club.
Yeah.
You know, because that goes back to like, especially with American comics, I think it's much easier to feel overwhelmed and to feel like there's no map, there's no guide. What am I supposed to do? Nobody's helping me. Because truly, let me ask you a question. If somebody was like in a bookstore and saw One Piece volume, I don't know, let's say volume 30, and they picked it up, would you slap it out of their hand and go, no, you have to start at 1? Or if they were thumbing through it and they're like, this looks interesting, couldn't they technically also just read that and maybe go from there and then go back if they wanted to? Like, couldn't they also just read any chapter of that larger story?
Yeah,
it should work as its own story. It's a story.
It's the same thing with people being like, I want to play a video game. I saw that you love Dark Souls. And I'm like,
you know what's another one?
Yeah.
I've heard, and I don't know anime the way you do, but I've heard this my whole life. The t-shirt you're wearing right now. Evangelion. I've been told by fans that it's like, that's not a great entry level mecha anime.
No.
Because it deconstructs the tropes in typical mecha anime.
Yeah.
So if you start with that, you're not going to really have an idea of what they're trying to do necessarily.
I think if you don't watch it if you don't go into it as a mecha anime and just watch it as an anime, because you're not going to get the mech battles. You're not going to get it does deconstruct.
Yes.
Look at this. Here we go.
Right?
Here we go.
This is what I've been told, and I believe it.
So many mecha animes are based off of like, oh, the teenager is powering it with his willpower and his emotions, blah, blah. And Evangelion kind of deviates from that, kind of makes fun of it a bit.
So to get the most out of that, you kind of have to have a little bit of that knowledge under your belt. It's the same with like, I can't recommend to a person who's never read a comic book, I'm not going to hand them Watchmen, because it is like dense and it's like, hey, this kind of deconstructs superheroes. You need to have other stuff under your belt to really appreciate. Oh, okay, I see what they're doing with this comic.
I honestly think this is why it's hard for someone to be both into both comic books and manga. I don't know really,
because it's a lot of work.
I don't know really anyone who's into both.
Have you seen the movie Selena with Jennifer Lopez from the 90s?
Yes.
It's like Edward James Olmos in that movie says, it's exhausting being Mexican American. You got to know about Christina and Oprah. To be a fan of like Western, like nerdy media and anime, you got to know so much about both worlds, I guess.
The amount of people who recommend me comic books and recommend tabletop gaming was a big one. Like you should start playing D&D. That's why I'm going with Magic, not D&D, because I was like, listen,
Baby
like
steps.
Me being a stand-up comedian and also a Twitch streamer.
Okay, don't brag. Okay, now you're just bragging.
Me being a stand-up comedian and also a Twitch streamer, all those things are that already is too. I'm not putting 100% of my time into one thing. I'm splitting it. And the reason why I love doing Twitch streaming is because I love video games. And I build an audience of my knowledge of video games and anime and manga. So when people come at me and they're like, "Oh, have you seen all the Star Wars movies?" It's like, no,
that's not my thing.
I spent that time watching anime.
I'm over here because you could easily flip it around. You know, if I go, "Oh, you haven't seen the new Star Wars movies? They're fun." You go, "Hector, you haven't seen." So I woke up and I was a blob, and now I'm married to my maid. And now I was like, I haven't seen that.
And that's why I think this dynamic works is because it's not two people who are into this. Because every time you see some sort of nerdy podcast or something, it's always like two people who are in the gaming space or two people who are in the anime space, two people who are in a comic book. Instead, you have two completely different nerds with no jobs, but a lot of hobbies and a lot of knowledge in their own hobbies. And I think that's fantastic, right?
We are each other's excuse to just share and talk about this stuff, I think.
I know, I love it. And I wanted to, because, you know, this is our first episode. We haven't really kind of introduced ourselves. As in what we do,
people.
And who we are as people.
What do we do?
So Hector, I want to know how you made your name into the nerdy space.
All right. Short version is I've loved comics and cartoons my whole life. I went to college to study animation. And I did. And I have a degree in that. And then I never ended up doing animation after I graduated. I got a job where I worked in movie post-production, visual effects. I helped make 3D movies, which is why I love 3D movies
so much.
A lot. And which is why I have all the new Star Wars movies in the 3D. Because if you're going to watch them, if you're going to sit through that stuff, do it with fun stuff flying at you and, you know, whoa, spaceship.
And someone who's really into it.
Really into it. Yeah, me. And then from that, I moved to Los Angeles. I've also been doing improv since I was in high school. And then I started to get good at it after high school, and then met people, and then had opportunities to just like do live internet nerdy shows. They went, "Hey, you're an improviser, so you're good on your feet and you're not nervous in front of a camera. And you know a bunch of nerdy shit." I go, "Yes, I do." So then that ended up becoming a job. And I've been doing a version of that for a long time. And
I feel like you've had like 1,000 podcasts. Or 1,000 shows.
A lot of them. Which means I'm either a horrible failure, or I am as
powerful in the most
powerful as Barbie, who's also had a lot of different jobs. So thank you very much. She's worked at McDonald's and been an astronaut.
Because I remember when I first, I think, started following you and like seeing all your stuff. You were like watching all the Simpsons episodes.
Yeah. Too much.
And then you also did the SpongeBob ones too, right?
I did a SpongeBob podcast.
And you also update your Instagram with like, okay, I watched all the Godzilla movies. Here are my rankings.
I hyperfixate. I'll go into
and
thing.
I love that. That was actually kind of my inspiration for me, being like, these are my top 10 games I played this year. I've done that for the last like 5 years of my life. This is the first time I wrote a review for all of them. Yeah. So I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I like that you do that, because I've never thought about using my Instagram as a place to share my nerdy stuff. It was always like, here's a comedy show I'm on. Here's a flyer I'm doing. Like, here's a stupid tweet. Mm-hmm. I never once, I completely I'm sure you saw my gaming Instagram.
Sure. But you were just looking at Instagram as like, this is supposed to be pictures of us on vacation and pictures of our food that we eat,
and not so much like, oh yeah, I should share more of my interests. And the minute, I guess this is kind of my story, the minute I started sharing more of my interest, because Twitter was always my place to do like game reviews, anime reviews, dumb tweets like that. I think it was right when I started incorporating the gaming and anime stuff into my stand-up more, and into like whatever dumb videos, sketches, started sharing things like here's a big statue I have. Ever since
what my tattoos are.
My tattoos. Ever since I started Twitch streaming, I started bringing in an audience very quickly that was like, oh, this person does shit that I like. Mm-hmm. And again, it goes back to being a woman in the space where you're like, I've kind of always kept that to myself, because the amount of backlash and misogyny I still get to this day.
I can already read comments on this about the fact that you haven't seen Star Wars. They're either going to be super positive or super negative. It's horrible. It's horrible.
There was a time though during my streaming, which
Yeah.
actually kind of has to do with the second part of today's episode, where I realized I need to stop being scared to do this.
Yeah. Just live your life.
Yeah,
just live your life.
It's fine. It was when I started playing Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah.
Because when I started streaming, I had just started getting into PlayStation games. I was always a Nintendo person. I was a fake gamer, in quote.
Really? I thought you were always like also a PlayStation person since back in the day.
No.
Oh.
A lot of the PlayStation games I played on like DS, Nintendo DS. Like whenever they would put like the JRPGs and stuff on there, I'd check them out and whatnot. But I was like a big Fire Emblem person. That wasn't really PlayStation.
No, you're right. It's Nintendo.
That was like GameCube and Nintendo and stuff.
Game Boy Advance. Yeah.
So it wasn't really until the PS4 came out a few years before I started streaming that I started getting into PlayStation games.
Wow.
And so while I was streaming, I was like, hey, I want to start playing Metal Gear Solid. I remember like being scared to say that out loud because it's like, how have you not played one of the most iconic video game franchises of all time? But it's like, hey, even though it was on GameCube, it just never was my thing.
Yeah.
But now that I stream, now that I'm like more open about my interests, people are like recommending things to me. Like I really want to like start doing things that I missed out on.
Yeah.
Like I played Shadow of the Colossus last year for the first time.
Oh God, maybe my favorite video game of all time.
And it's fantastic. And I was so scared of getting backlash to admit these things, but instead it was people being like, wait, there's someone who hasn't played Metal Gear Solid. And I was like, oh no. And they're like, I have new content.
Yeah.
I can see somebody's reaction in this game. And it went from like people berating me for not
shaming
me to people being excited that they see someone who's never experienced it. And so that I remember like getting teared up about it. Like I was like, I have a community now where I can admit that I'm kind of a fake sometimes. And then but then
everyone just has different life experience.
That's what I mean. So I played through all of them on stream and it was an amazing experience. Ended up being one of my favorite video game franchises of all time. And when I talk to people about it, they don't say, wait, you're a new fan? Oh, you don't know. They're
like, great.
They don't do that shit. They show me things like, oh, now that you've beat it, you got to go back and watch the announcement trailers for Metal Gear Solid 4.
Yeah.
They're so funny. Or you got to go back and watch this interview. It's so funny. And so now it's like,
now that you played all those too, did you play any of the ones on original Nintendo, Metal Gear or Metal Gear 2?
Not yet, no.
Oh,
no.
I have heard mixed things about them. I don't know if they're going to be.
I've heard mixed things too. It's the same thing why I never played Earthbound Beginnings,
but
and
you
just
did
played Earthbound and Mother
SNES.
3.
Yeah, that
yeah.
one.
So
interesting.
So now I'm starting to catch up because I'm blinded to the misogyny that I deal with. Like I still get hateful comments. All the time. And I just feel like these are just miserable people online. Now I'm like, cool, I want to experience the things that I never got to play. So I have a backlog of like big game franchises that I haven't played yet. Same thing with anime. Like
awesome.
Yeah. And it's great. And I think that's also why, like, obviously I'm not where I want to be financially, but I think that's why I've become more successful in the space is because I think a lot of people are too scared to admit that they're not the biggest nerd or that they still have things that they want to learn and explore. And I also think that people are too scared to be authentically themselves. And so when they see someone, they either want to support them and want to be there, or they want to bring them down because it makes them feel bad about themselves.
100%. Yep. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're describing insecure people. When we're talking about toxic fandom, it's not always the case, but like you said, it's mostly dudes and it's mostly stems from insecurity. I have built my personality around this thing. When I see other people coming in and sharing in that thing, that makes my thing less special, less exclusive. Which is like the dumbest thing in the world too.
Yeah, it's like you should be making friends.
Oh my God. Yes,
from this,
exactly.
not
exactly.
shunning people out.
When I see attractive people, which is, Lisa, that's both you and I. Way too attractive to be in this industry. When they see too attractive, Warhammer 40K, too hot to play that. When they see that, honestly, when a very awkward or socially awkward person who struggled and is currently struggling, and I get this and I have empathy for this, when people like that, who not everything is going right in their lives, but they have a video game or they have a comic book and they have a knowledge and it's turned into something that is valuable on the internet.
Yeah.
Because they can go to spaces, go to places, go to forums, go to message boards, and then talk their shit or whatever. Oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's read every issue of Green Lantern or whatever, like the comic book guy from The Simpsons. When they see a hot-looking Mark roll up to the hobby store and go like, I play Warhammer 40K too, they're going to look at that person obviously with jealousy and frustration because it's like, no, I'm grinding to barely get to this point and every other part of my life sucks. And now here comes this person that's well-rounded, seemingly, and pretty happy, and they also partake in my hobby, I have nothing left. I have that's where all of that anger and frustration and insecurity comes from.
So many, like, I posted my jokes about like Elden Ring and stuff like that, and it's like, these clips aren't for everyone.
Yeah.
But and then like there's some people who are like, oh, it's funny even though I don't understand what it's about. And then the people who do not understand they're like, I remember specifically I got this comment that said this girl wrote an Elden Ring joke because she knew it'd go viral. I was like, yes. My poor innocent heart was like,
my favorite.
What is trending right now?
Yeah, that's my favorite thing.
What is this Elden Ring?
That level of stupidity where it's like, no,
I'm
not
you're
Elon
right. Musk pretending to play Path of Exile.
Yeah, right. Trying to get other gamers validation. We don't care about that. I am not going to sink so many of these hours of my lifetime into a hobby unless I'm into it. I'm not going to sink hours and hours and hours into research and playing through a game that I apparently don't love for real, that I'm just grinding through it just so that other people can go, oh, cool. Like that's not worth it.
It's also the thing where it's like when I play a video game on stream, and it is like one of those From Software games like Sekiro's.
Yeah.
It's Shadow Dice Twice. One of the hardest games ever made.
Super hard. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And people who have played it be like, no, it's not. I'm like, yes, it is. You should be proud of yourself. Like, yeah.
There you go. Because they can't argue against that. They go, no, I shouldn't. This is an easy game for babies. Okay. Are you saying you're not skilled? Are you a dumb dummy? No, I'm trying to compliment you here. It is hard.
I'm like this. I remember I like posted a clip where I cried because I beat the last boss. Everyone's like, he wasn't even that hard. I'm like, he was, and you should be proud of yourself. And that person could not comment back. They were like, oh,
thank you. Yeah. That's like, right. Go away, man. Go.
But that is one of the hardest games ever made. Like it's just voted one of the hardest games ever made.
Yep. That's not a. That's
I can
not
beat
a.
it now. It's fine.
That's not. That's not a your opinion. That is a like. So many people agreed upon fact.
Yeah.
So it is really annoying when you have those naysayers. Who are like, no, it's not.
And
not
I was
hard.
at the second to the last boss. And some people came to my stream and they started backseat gaming me and they kept telling me I'm trash. And I remember I paused. I was like, yes, I am telling me I'm trash at the second to the last boss of the hardest game is like going to the bronze Olympic medalist for a sport and be like, that person doesn't know how to play. Like, it's like, I've made it this far. Like, I don't need you to tell me what to do. I know what to do. I'm just not good at it. And I'm getting better.
I've loved the, if I've posted videos over the past couple of years where I'm talking about something or sharing something or whatever it is. Or I also do videos where I'm like in the moment watching something for the first time. A lot of my YouTube presence is like me and my two friends were reacting to content. That's what our YouTube channel is. And people will be like, you got this detail wrong. And I'll be like, cool. Upload the video that you recorded of yourself watching this for the first time where you're not looking anything up on your phone, where you're not looking at the constant other internet videos that come out immediately after the episode drops where they're explaining every single detail to you and recalling decades of television history that I forgot in the moment. Go ahead and send me the video of you doing that.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't do that?
Or if I say someone's name's wrong, like Mads Mikkelsen.
Yeah. You said it right.
There you go.
No one would ever say that wrong. You said that name perfectly right, Lisa.
People obviously need to remember, like, because we consume so much stuff, we may not remember everything off the bat. We may not be good at something right off the bat. Like if I don't play a video game for a few days and I get back into it, I'm going to be a little rusty.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think just because I'm aware of this as me as a person.
Yeah.
And when people try to take that away from me, I'm like, no, you guys are just dumb. You guys are just assholes that just want to ruin someone's day.
That's it.
And so we're starting this podcast now. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Because we want to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. And I think as I've mentioned, like the dynamic of you and I being different kinds of nerds, there was another thing too that made me think of this is when you were reading/watching Don to Don. Yes, because your wonderful girlfriend voices Momo.
She's the main. She's the main character in it. That's right. Yeah.
I thought you said she's amazing. She's amazing.
Yeah.
But you were saying because you hadn't watched too much anime, you haven't read a lot of manga, that there's some weird things that they do in there that
100%.
are
Listen, I'll say this: out of all of the Japanese art that I've absorbed, or maybe stuff from Korea, or maybe stuff from China, whatever it is, anything that's sort of Eastern from that part of the world, there's always something that I'm like, this is interesting or different or unique. And I am like, whoa, I'm trying to clock it.
Yeah.
When I haven't seen the whole season, but I saw like a handful of episodes of Attack on Titan. My takeaway was like, dude, there is the way that like emotion is displayed in these characters and in this story is so not what I'm used to. the way that other characters in the media that I consume express emotion. And I remember talking to my friends about it, talking to my girlfriend about it, who she is a beautiful white woman from Massachusetts, but she also lived in Japan for 6 years.
Yeah.
So she has a very interesting perspective of what she observed while she lived there and was a part of that society for 6 years. Good and bad, all, the same way that there's so many good and bad things about living in the United States. Yeah. There's too many to list. But those perspectives are so interesting where I'm like, why is this? I'm just, trying to figure stuff out, asking questions. I'm being curious about the media, not judgmental. And then she'll explain stuff to me. She explained to me the entire purpose of the movie Shin Godzilla, which is maybe my favorite Godzilla movie. Yeah. People love Godzilla -1. I don't know if you've seen Shin Godzilla yet.
I haven't seen Shin Godzilla, but I want to now.
It is a movie that you're watching it and it's like horrifying. The Godzilla's also really like fucked up looking in that movie. And he kind of goes from like a larval state into the Godzilla we might know. But even his teeth are like especially jacked up. So I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. This is not what I'm used to, but very cool. But the whole rest of the movie is really about the bureaucracy in Japan and how the Japanese government might respond to a natural disaster. Now, my girlfriend explained to me, this is because this movie was made in response to how Japan reacted to the tsunami. And I was like, that's fascinating to me. So the same way original Godzilla is clearly Japanese storytellers reacting to the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
Like so much of Japanese media is like Ghost in the Shell is about that. Like Akira is about that. So much stuff. So if you don't know about that context, you can still enjoy and appreciate that media.
Yeah.
But when you know the context and the history and you go, this is what the same, even with like the basic simplistic Star Wars. 1977, the first movie that came out, Star Wars.
See, I've seen those Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I love them.
They're super fun, but they're kids movies. They're wonderful kids movies, but they're also something a little more because as you get older, if you grow up in the United States, our history lessons are
all
over the place. Like we learn history, but it's also like a really weird whatever. Yeah. It's like
we also didn't grow up in the era of the internet.
Yes.
When we were learning all this stuff.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. Just straight out of books. Yeah. Like, and there's usually the winning side is writing the history. There's a reason
why Columbus Day was taken away only recently.
But like when you get older and you go, George Lucas was this young bearded hippie guy who was talking about the Vietnam War. And you go, oh my God, he made the rebels the scrappy, diverse, sort of like guerrilla warriors, these fighters that are like in the trenches and have no, funds and no sort of versus a massive like industrial war complex, which is the empire, which, so I remember even growing up in the 80s, 90s that like, even in how popular Star Wars was, I still felt like it was only after I grew up a little bit that I started to see more analysis of like interviews with George Lucas, asking him about those kinds of themes. You know what I mean? Like that stuff became, I feel like, a little bit more well-known as opposed to Star Wars, a big science fiction adventure, and this is what it does.
And now people are like, Star Wars is woke. I'm like, it's always been.
It's always
crazy.
been. Anyway, so it's there's a lot to dig into when I'm reading Dandadan, for example, and there's stuff that I'm like, whoa, why is this so weird to me? And then I'll realize like, okay, these are the storytellers talking about what they deal with and live with in Japan. I had a friend
who is watching anime for like the first time.
Yeah, fascinating.
And he was like, why is so much anime circled around teenagers?
Yep. Yeah.
And I was like,
great question.
Because Japan society is very much like you need to get your shit together before you're 20 because your life is over. And like in a jokingly way, yes, but like and also if you're watching a bunch of shows like Naruto, My Academia, they're shonens. They're made for 12 to 17-year-old boys, but in general,
and what does shonen mean?
Shonen literally just means boy in Japan. Oh. But like a shonen series is meant for boys between the ages of 12 and 17.
There you go.
Like
Shonen Jump is a magazine that collects and publishes a lot of these stories.
But the biggest animes you see out there are all shonen. So a lot of people go, so many animes are based around teenagers. Well, that's the thing, is that so many of the stories are catered towards teenagers, but also for the fact that you're very rarely going to find anime relationships that are for older people. And I was like, I've seen like 600 anime and I can maybe name 10 of them that actually are catered towards people that are like 40. And like they have, I think, there's a couple of them that I'm watching now, or that I just watched. One of my favorite ones of all time is called Shoyogen Roku Rakugo Shinju, which is about this thing called rakugo, something we don't have in the U.S.
Yeah, what is it?
And it's basically a Japanese it's a Japanese form of entertainment where you sit down and you're on your knees and you're telling a very elaborate story, and it's very emotional. And you know how you're watching Attack on Titan, you're like, the way that they display emotional, it's very raw, it's very aggressive. Yeah.
Interesting.
And that's
this like a theater? Is this like a
it's
like...
in a theater. And it's just one person telling a story. It's like a sit-down comedy thing. And in the anime, they elaborate the stories into beautiful animation.
So visual.
It's very haunting.
Whoa, that's cool.
And so, but I was like, I don't know what rakugo is.
Yeah.
And I learned what rakugo is because of watching this anime. Never heard of it in the US. I went to Japan and saw rakugo live. And it was amazing.
That's cool, dude.
But that's the thing, is like, that's something you would only learn from taking in like anime. Like you would never learn about that watching a detective comics series.
Yeah, correct.
Or
and
you'd
never learn about that also just maybe growing up in the United States.
Yeah.
You're not going to open a history book and learn that interesting thing about Japanese culture.
Yeah.
And it also goes to like, I've also had a lot of discussions about this, about how society, socially, it's very different in Japan, and emotions are typically very repressed in most regards. You go to work and it's very, listen to your boss, you have to do what your boss says, but as soon as everybody clocks out, you go to the karaoke joint, you go to the bar with your boss, and you guys are peers, and you'll get drunk with one another. And it's like, that's where all of the emotion comes out. And then the next day, the next morning, 9 a.m.
Isekai series are very popular.
Yes.
Where they get into another world because they're away from like their cookie cutter office lifestyle. Yeah. And that's why their stories are just so like elaborate, especially with emotions.
Yes. The emotions are repressed and then they come out. And Attack on Titan is this great metaphor for like, what if the worst fucking most horrifying thing happened? These giant naked humans that are eating, like that's just so over the top.
Which is also a very high political series too, eventually. But like, there was something specifically you said about Dandadan that you were like, I remember responding in my head, oh, Hector's not anime pilled enough.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember.
It's fun. I can't remember. Maybe it was.
I think it's the weird things that they do with Momo
and
like
I've really been sort of learning about, if you haven't seen this series or read the manga, which they're one and the same story for now, both. In the first part of the story, the young girl who's they're like in school, they're school age, they're like high school age, 16, somewhere in there. They go to investigate ghosts and they go to investigate UFOs. And the girl gets abducted by UFOs, and then her clothes are stripped off and she's in her underwear. She's a 16-year-old girl strapped to a chair. And it's sort of comedic, but it's also very horrifying, scary, that they are going to, the joke, aliens will probe you. They say they're going to like harvest her reproductive system because these aliens are all male and they don't reproduce anymore, so they need human women to all scary, all frankly a little bit kinky. It's all weird shit, right? Not sort of normal. And again, this series is not for kids. It shouldn't be. I know young people watch it because it's teenager based, but it really is more for the mature audiences, whatever that means.
But that's the thing; it's not in Japan.
Exactly.
And that's the thing, is that like there.
But I don't, just real quick, I want to finish too. She ends up not being assaulted, even though that is assault. But then in that moment, she gains a power and is able to fight them all back. And ultimately, a lot of Dandadan is about putting this woman character in these positions where there's going to be creepy Japanese businessmen. There's going to be creepy, they're in a sauna, and all of a sudden it's these men that show up, and you're like, they look otherworldly and alien. And it's this metaphor for like, this is maybe the type of shit that women and young women have to deal with in Japan, which is, one of the many problems that they might have culturally. The same way that the U.S. has a lot of societal problems.
There's also that, but there's also a lot of authors that are just fucking creepy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you figure out that balance? But from what I've heard so far, at least, I don't know exactly what the intention is. I also can't read a Japanese interview and like, oh, okay, I know exactly what they're saying. Things have to be translated and whatever. But from what I understand, the like author or creator of Dandadan is doing it purposefully to try and, hey, this is the story I'm trying to tell. Women have to deal with this shit. What if they had superpowers?
Kill is like one of my favorite animes of all time.
What?
Kill la Kill.
Kill la Kill
is one of my favorite animes of all time, and it's literally about high schoolers. They're all high schoolers on some weird planet, and they have to basically. The weird premise of the series is that your clothes cause powers, and so they start to like strip down. It's basically makes fun of fan service in anime.
Yes.
But it's done by Trigger, or it might be Gainax or Trigger, which one of my favorite animation studios
Great
all
studios,
time.
both of them.
Yeah. And
I hate that term, but I'm glad that show is like trying to make fun of that.
And that's the thing is that people watch and be like, it makes me uncomfortable.
Yes.
And the thing
and
is the show is very funny. And it very much is, you can tell that the intention is not to be creepy and to be weird. It basically makes fun of how fan service and how they treat women in anime series. But it's one of those things too where in my head it's like I have to use the term anime pilled because it's like people who don't see anime, I'm not going to be like, you got to watch this first.
Absolutely.
It's the same thing in the comic book world. I'm sure there's the Watchmen thing where it's like, I want to read a comic book. You're not going to be watch.
Trigger warning. There's sexual assault in that comic book
because of the studio.
Because of the studio. No, totally. And you know, and it's and the thing that I also realized growing up with just like American comic books. Oh, back to your point too about like so much of this is adolescent based.
Mm-hmm.
The same is true with, so I love superheroes very much. I have a superhero on my t-shirt, but I also just love comics, period. And there's a lot of different genres of comic books, but most of it, you walk into a comic book store, you walk into a Barnes and Noble, it's going to be dominated by men and women in tights.
Yeah.
I get that. But so if you tell somebody like, I love comics, they go, I don't know, it's all this, right? You go, no, there's other stuff. There's amazing horror comics and you know, film noir and crime thriller and just really great shit. But you have to be, you know, accept the fact that this is the majority of it.
Yeah.
Why is that? Well, because historically comic books are catered towards young people and kids and teaching them moral lessons or whatever. But as I grew up reading stuff too, I'm like, hey, you can see the evolution of how American comic books have mostly been written and drawn mostly by hardworking, well-meaning American white guys in New York, around the country, whatever, like mostly. And they've mostly been more progressive-minded because they care about, you know, the state of the world.
And also they're superheroes.
Yeah. But that would still mean that like every time a well-meaning white guy was like, hey, you know what? They're right. I'm looking around and all of our characters are mostly white guys. What if I want to add a black character to this? And then they'll do it. And then to the best of their ability, there's still sort of like some offensive tropes that might be included in like the creation of this character, you know? Then it takes a little while and then other writers will come in and go, oh, okay, thanks for getting us started. Let me hear some authenticity.
That's why localization and representation are very important, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. But as I was a kid reading comics in the 90s especially, the closest term I could think of to, because I was thinking about this today, the closest I could think of to the term fan service, which, how would you describe the term fan service to people that don't know what that is as it relates to anime?
In anime, fan service is basically like trying to make things sexual without making them sexual. Yeah. Like
really just pushing that envelope right there at the line.
Mainly because I know like it's kind of like it's not really like a shock value thing. It's just it adds a flavor, I should say.
Okay.
Yeah, you know.
And would you also say that historically mostly the people that are making either manga, Japanese comics, or animation in Japan are probably mostly men?
Oh,
historically
absolutely.
Yeah, so they're going to want to draw some boobies and some butts. And some, we're not going to show you nudity, but that kind of thing.
Implied nudity, implied everything.
All that stuff. So growing up, I'm reading comic books and I'm loving superhero characters. And all of a sudden I am noticing, I'm like, oh, look at the way that the women superheroes are dressed. And look at the way the women characters are used in storylines. And look at, you know, the closest term I could think of is it's now known as cheesecake art. Or thankfully, for the ladies, meaning the inverse, is whenever there's a dude that's drawn...
Meat cake art.
Beefcake.
Oh, like
meat cake is good. We'll go with meat cake. It's either cheesecake or meat cake. You can see that meat. You can see it hanging there.
We like beefcake art.
Beefcake art, cheesecake art, which is like, it's a thing that as I was a young reader, I also sort of had to like just accept, like, yeah, that's part of it. I'm rolling my eyes. This is what a superhero woman costume mostly looks like. They're going to show more skin. This is what a male, covered head, neck to toe. That's just kind of how it is. But then as more of these conversations started to happen, as more women comic book readers, which there have always been women comic book readers, always been women sci-fi fans, always been women fantasy fans, whatever it is, started to be like, no, this is bullshit. You guys should address some of this or at least make it more balanced or whatever. Things are getting better and better, but they're still mostly historically, across the board. Like it's always a challenge to, and there's also nothing wrong with cheesecake and beefcake art if a couple of things are happening, if it's pretty well balanced, if it's all in good fun, if it's something where it's not going to give a young reader the wrong idea. Do you know what I mean? About
Yeah.
like women or the opposite sex or dating or whatever the thing is. Like, you could even argue that the fact that they had Peter Parker, Spider-Man, marry a supermodel kind of gives the wrong idea to young male comic book readers.
Yeah.
Like me, nerdy guys that were awkward, are told through the story like, hey, you know what? You're great. But just as soon as a supermodel notices you, she's going to want to marry you. It's like, dude, you also have to be a good person, and you also have to like not be shallow and just, you know, be a normal.
I mean, it's the same thing with like growing up with anime and stuff. That's why Sailor Moon was so important.
Yes, it was.
Like, Sailor Moon is like, they're not damsels in distress. They don't. I mean, Tuxedo Mask pretends he comes in and actually.
I love that he's a meme now, by the way, that he's a meme for useless men. That he shows up and he goes, well, didn't I anyway? Like, isn't that the idea? Like, it was always like that. My work here is done. That's Tuxedo Mask.
And that's the thing is like, the reason why I guess kind of deviated towards anime and manga is because I grew up watching Pokemon.
Great.
And then from there, my cousins were really into anime and they had more access to like cable and stuff. And then I got super into Sailor Moon because I was like, oh my God, like girl superheroes.
Yeah.
That's fucking
the
awesome.
Best. It's the best.
You know? And then of course, when I started deep diving more into anime, I realized like, this is actually kind of rare.
Yes.
Unless you're watching complete Magic Girl series.
Right.
Like I started getting more into shonens because those were big. And it's like, I remember watching Naruto and me being like, I'm not a big fan of the Sakura character. And then realizing over time, oh, this is just Kishimoto doesn't know how to write women very well.
Yeah.
And he's focusing more on Naruto and Sasuke's relationship. But it became like an ongoing thing. But the thing is I always managed to find series that had strong female characters.
Yep.
And then that's why I was like, okay, this is way more of my thing. And like I think the reason why I didn't really get into superhero stuff, because I tried to a few years ago.
I don't blame you.
But when I started watching Marvel movies,
great,
I was like, these are really good.
They're fun.
But then they kept coming out with so many that I could.
It's okay. You're fine. You're fine.
Listen,
don't worry.
It's a thing where it was just overwhelming me.
I get it.
And
don't
then,
be overwhelmed.
Yeah, and
don't
then
worry
trying to get in the comic books on top of that. Yeah,
I got you. Don't worry about it.
That's what you're here.
Lisa, we're putting a pin in this. This is not an end of the conversation. This is just the beginning. I got you covered. Don't you worry.
Yeah.
I'm going to be able to help you out.
But it's one of the
you're fine.
It is one of those things where it's like, I think as a young kid, you either go for one or the other. There wasn't a lot of people watching Sailor Moon and reading comic books at the same time.
They're kind of accessing different parts of our brains, I guess. So that makes sense.
And because of that, I play a lot more of like the really heavy Japanese games.
Yep.
And I was going to talk about Death Stranding today for a little bit.
We ran out of time.
Which we ran out of time for.
Yeah.
But that's great because we can talk about it next week, because I definitely do want to deep dive into the video game aspects of
there's
these
a lot.
Different types of views on things.
I love it. Okay.
But
I'm excited. Before we keep going, producer Mark was trying to chime in with something. You pointed. What was the point?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Nicely done.
See? Yeah. Even Mark, our producer, he's kind of a nerd. He's a secret nerd.
He's kind of a nerd. He's very handsome, but he's a nerd.
Yeah.
He's a nerd. He's like, he's going, shh, don't. I need to keep my job.
He's a really cool guy, actually.
I can't be found out.
He's not us. We wear our nerds' hearts on our sleeves. Yep. I literally do, because they're on my body forever.
Yeah. So before we wrap out, do we want to try to do a quick, what are you into right now? What are you playing? What are you watching? What are you reading? Or do you want to save that?
Which will be perfect for next week, because right now I am playing Death Stranding.
Give him a tease. Death Stranding.
For the first time. Yeah. And I have so many opinions about Kojima and as a Metal Gear Solid fan and how it ties into his other games. And as far as anime goes, I just started watching Sakamoto Days. It's weekly.
Great.
And I just finished Beastars. And we'll talk about those.
Okay,
what
that
about
sounds
you?
good. Ooh, I want to watch those. I'm almost done with the first season of Delicious in Dungeon. I'm watching an anime.
So good.
It's weird.
So good, though.
And I have a lot of opinions about that, too. It's very interesting. It's really weird, but it's also a very interesting...
I call it Dungeon Meshi because I'm a...
Dungeon Meshi? What does Meshi mean?
That's the Japanese name for it.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah,
Great. Call it Dungeon Meshi. That's fine. You call it whatever you like.
Abby probably knows what it is.
Yeah, probably. But that's a fun one because I think I'm bringing to the table a little bit of my knowledge of like fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons and Lord of the Rings, and so now all of a sudden
there's not a lot of fantasy animes.
Right, so it's a Japanese take on some of that stuff. I'm like, this is fascinating. Anyway, I'm also reading a bunch of old comics that I'm really excited about because DC
Detective Comics
just started putting out this new line of their collections, which don't worry, I've already scanned them. You don't have to come over. They're good to go. I've put them in my library. They're in there. but it's a lot of reprinting of like old original, here's the first little run of Superman comics from the year 1938. You want to talk about have superheroes always been woke? I'm literally reading the first ever superhero stories ever.
Woke man.
Yeah, and he's a social justice warrior. He's just running around trying to help people who can't help themselves, and beating up corrupt government officials every single issue, just slapping them around. It's the greatest thing in the world. It's great. But so I'm really excited because I'm reading all these old DC comics. So that's what I'm into right now. But a lot more to talk about next episode.
Yeah.
This was fantastic.
This is a great first episode.
Yeah.
And I hope you guys are excited to listen to more. And we will see you next episode.
Yeah.
Yay.
Thanks. Bye.